The last of the sun was a faint, cold ember on the edge of the world, its final light catching the vast, snow-blanketed plains in a soft, blue glow. A bitter wind moaned through the lodgepole pines, shaking their snow-laden boughs and carrying the sharp, clean scent of deep winter. She was a dark shape moving against the endless white, each step a deliberate, painful effort. The frozen crust of snow cracked like gunshots under her worn moccasins. Her deer-hide dress was frayed and dusted with ice, clinging to her shivering frame. Her hands, wrapped in scraps of rabbit fur, were raw and stiff, but they trembled for more than just the cold. They trembled with the memory of a long, solitary flight. Yet, beneath the bone-deep weariness and the hidden ache of old bruises, a quiet, stubborn will burned on. Then she saw it, a thin, gray ribbon of smoke unwinding from a chimney barely visible in the gathering dark. A silent promise of life, of warmth. She fixed her eyes on it and pushed forward, her breath pluming in the frigid air. The cabin emerged from the twilight as if it were part of the landscape itself, its low, sturdy form half buried in a drift. The log walls, silvered with age and frost, seemed to absorb the dying light. She stopped at the edge of the clearing, her chest tight. She could smell it now, the rich, honest scent of burning pine. It was the smell of survival. A movement by the door caught her eye. A large wolf dog, its gray coat thick for winter, lay across the threshold. It lifted its head, ears swiveling forward, its intelligent eyes watching her without malice, but with a deep, primal assessment. She held its gaze and gave a single, slow nod, a gesture of respect between two creatures of the wild. Then, she drew a shaky breath, pulling the last of her courage around her like a thin shield. Her voice, when it came, was raspy from disuse and the cold. "I am tired and I am hurt," she called out, the words barely more than a whisper carried on the wind. "May I share the warmth of your fire for just one night?" Inside, the man looked up from the hearth where he was feeding a log to the flames. He was a man of the mountains, his stillness as deep as the winter outside. The lines around his eyes spoke of years of squinting into the sun and wind. His dark, calm eyes took her in, not as a problem or a stray, but as another soul weathered by the harshness of the world. He didn't speak. Instead, he simply gestured with a slow, deliberate hand toward the empty chair by the fire, an invitation that held both a warning and a welcome. She stepped inside, and the heat hit her like a physical wave, so sudden and profound it made her dizzy. The very air in the small cabin felt like a balm, soothing the exhaustion etched into her skin. He wordlessly held out a heavy wool blanket. She took it and wrapped it around her shoulders, the simple weight of it a kindness that nearly undid her. In the flickering firelight, the evidence of her journey became clear. The shadow of a yellowing bruise on her cheekbone, the fine, red scratches on her hands. The story of her flight was written on her skin in a language of pain. She sank into the chair opposite his, folding her hands in her lap, and for the first time in weeks, she felt the terrible, vigilant tension in her shoulders begin to ease. A deep silence filled the room, a fragile, living thing. It was the sound of trust being born carefully and in silence within the safe, warm walls of the cabin. Morning came softly, and with it a new rhythm. She was the first to rise, moving to the cold hearth with a quiet purpose. He watched from his cot as she coaxed a small flame from the kindling, her hands, though still marked from her journey, moving with a gentle certainty. He didn't speak, only observed with a patience carved from a lifetime of solitude. It was the beginning of their silent dialogue. The days that followed were measured not in hours, but in shared tasks. They stacked firewood in a neat cord against the cabin wall, the rhythmic thud of the logs a language they both understood. He showed her where the roof leaked when the snow melted. She held the pitch while he sealed the crack. She swept the hard-packed earth floor, chasing the dust of winter from the corners, and he noticed the way she didn't shy from the work, despite the weariness that sometimes shadowed her eyes. Their communication was built in glances and gestures. When the weight of a log was too much, his hand was there to steady her end without a word. When he paused to scan the tree line, a habit born of living alone, she would follow his gaze, understanding the vigilance. It was a dance of mutual respect, a quiet pleasure found in the simple act of maintaining a shelter against the wild. There were moments, too, of unexpected lightness. A soft chuckle when she nearly dropped an armful of wood. A shared, weary smile after battling a stubborn patch of ice on the path. These small, unguarded sounds wove themselves into the fabric of the cabin, stitching a delicate tapestry of connection. She began to see the care in his measured actions, the sincerity behind his silence. He saw not a fragile woman to be protected, but a person whose true strength was her relentless will to endure. And slowly, imperceptibly at first, the space between them began to soften, warmed by the shared fire and the quiet rhythm of their life. But as the days bled into one another, a shadow would sometimes cross her face. In the middle of patching a pair of his worn socks or looking out the frosted window, a memory would seize her, and her posture would become a fortress. He saw it every time. He saw the way her eyes would dart towards a sound only she could hear, the way her shoulders would tense against a weight only she carried. Yet he never pressed. He offered only the steady, unchanging calm of his presence, a silent understanding that some wounds need silence to heal. One evening, as a blizzard began to lace the windows with new frost, she watched him sharpen his knife by the fire. The wind outside was a low moan, a reminder of the world she had fled. "You have asked me nothing," she said, her voice quiet but clear over the fire's crackle. He looked up, his hand stilling. "Some stories are heavy to carry. No sense in making you shoulder them before you're ready." His quiet faith in her felt more powerful than any demand. It made the secret she carried feel both heavier and lighter all at once. In that moment, she allowed herself to truly look at him, not as a temporary sanctuary, but as a man. And she wondered if this quiet refuge could become something more permanent. The following morning, the world was buried under a fresh, deep snow, the silence so profound it felt sacred. He was in the doorway, outlined by the pale light, watching her as she stirred the morning broth. There was a new attentiveness in his gaze now, as if he was seeing not just her, but the strength it had taken for her to arrive at his door. Their life settled into a gentle pattern. She began to share fragments of her past, not the dark core of it, but the edges. Stories of summer hunts, and the way the light fell through the cottonwoods in her homeland. He, in turn, shared his own pieces, the peace of a first snowfall, the way to read the weather in the clouds, the simple satisfaction of a well-stocked woodpile. He taught her the language of the land, and in return, she showed him the quiet defiance that had kept her alive. A fragile, precious trust was weaving itself between them, thread by careful thread. She found herself laughing more freely, the sound of strange and wonderful music in the small cabin. She realized her sense of safety was no longer just about the four walls around her, but about the man who stood within them. Then, one night, the wind changed. It came in a sudden, violent gust that shook the shutters. But it wasn't the force of it that froze her. It was the smell it carried on its breath, the distinct, acrid scent of a campfire that was not their own. She went rigid, her blood running cold. The book she was mindlessly tracing patterns with fell from her lap. The danger she had outrun was no longer a memory. It was here, carried on the wind, smelling of smoke and pursuit. His eyes snapped to hers. In that single breathless moment, he saw the raw fear she had hidden so well, and he understood everything. The solitary journey, the hidden bruises, the unspoken terror, it all crystallized in his mind. Without a word, he was on his feet and moving toward her. There was no hesitation in his step, no question in his eyes. He did not reach for a weapon. He simply placed himself between her and the door, his presence a solid, unbreakable wall. His gaze held hers, steady and unwavering, and in its dark reflection she saw a promise, clear as day. "You are not alone." A shuddering breath escaped her, the first full breath she felt she had taken in years. The tension that had been her constant companion for so long finally broke, and the words, so long imprisoned by fear, began to rise to the surface. And so she began to speak. The words came slowly at first, then in a steady, quiet stream, revealing the danger that had hunted her, the reason her feet had carried her so far into the cold. He listened, his silence a deep, calm well for her fear. He didn't flinch from the darkness in her story. His presence alone was a shelter against the storm of her memories. When her voice finally faded, a profound quiet settled over the cabin, broken only by the soft hiss and pop of the fire. And in that shared silence, something fundamental changed. The fragile thread of trust that had grown between them didn't just hold. It thickened, strengthened, becoming a tether. It was a bond forged not in ease, but in shared vulnerability, a lifeline thrown across the chasm of their pasts. Outside, the wind screamed its fury against the walls, a brutal and relentless world. But inside, the warmth was different now. It was deeper, rooted in something unshakable. She shifted closer to him on the hearth. He didn't move away. Her hand came to rest gently on his arm, and he met her gaze, his own steady and sure, holding her there in that quiet understanding. The snow piled high against the windows, sealing them in their sanctuary. And in that suspended moment, they both knew. The cabin was no longer just a shelter from the storm. It was the place where fear had turned to trust, where loneliness had become companionship, and where a simple act of kindness had quietly, defiantly, bloomed into the beginning of a love that promised to outlast the winter. Their story, once a burden of survival, was now a shared path forward, lightened by the promise of a future written together.